Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at BTB World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is going to be with reference to the economic conditions in the country and, of course, the aftermath of the budget that has been passed, something that, of course, met with a lot of criticism and, of course, is being taken on as a very tax-laden and aggressive budget. The government also defends it, saying that it is a tough statement for the government to give, and that this is something that the government has had to do previously as well, and even now with regards to where we stand and with regards to the IMF negotiations, of course, for which this budget obviously was also planned and then passed. This is important, especially with regards to what the finance minister is also talking about, given the fact that the negotiations are going to be then planned with the IMF, and what Pakistan hopes for in the next 3 to 4 weeks is to at least get an SLA from the IMF with regards to this bailout package, which is a bit more than $6 billion. And so this is important, especially in terms of whether or not this budget is actually going to be aligned with the IMF's conditions. Of course, many of the measures have been taken keeping that in mind, but varying reports keep on coming in with regards to whether or not the demands have been completely met, and then what sort of timeline we're actually looking at in terms of the measures and the burden that this adds to the people of Pakistan and, of course, the current state of economy, and while at the same time, of course, hoping for the SLA to come about with the IMF and to, of course, stabilize the economy. We have been seeing a positive trajectory at the PSX, but we also need to see what exactly will be the result on the businesses and, of course, the common people in the country, in order to making sure that this is not just a budget that, of course, is there in terms of the IMF, but also is there in terms of taking care of the people. And, of course, the government is then able to move forward with it with the support of the people in the different political parties. So we're going to be taking a look at this in terms of how this will now impact the people of Pakistan, its economy, the IMF negotiations, and the future courses of action. Our next segment is going to be taking a look at the very important issue of terrorism and the state of affairs, of course, that Pakistan has had to deal with for quite some time now. And in an unfortunate recent incident, we've seen that the ex-senator that was killed in an ID blast in Bajor, along with 3 others, is another such incident that has taken place. And Mr. Hidayatullah was, of course, part of this, and he embraced martyrdom because of this, in terms of what has been going on in the country for quite some time now, and the way that these terrorist activities have spiked. This is again something that the different provinces of Pakistan have highlighted. Even the ex-senator himself had highlighted that in the previous months or so, even before the elections. Rising, of course, the state of affairs in terms of the terrorist activities and the groups that are active, particularly in KP and Balochistan and elsewhere in the country as well, and what sort of mechanisms need to be taken moving forward. So we're going to be taking a look at what this means, especially in terms of Pakistan's strategy against terrorism, the Azm-e-Istikam that was announced by the Prime Minister, and of course the need for consensus of different political parties to be on the same page on this front, and to making sure that this is something that we have zero tolerance for and that we are able to counter. So we're going to be taking a look at that at the end of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farrukh, K.Pitafi and Raja Faisal. We've also been joined online by political analyst Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Thank you very much, Dr. Niaz, for joining us and being part of the discussion today. It's been a while that you've been part of the show. The discussion, of course, around the economy and, of course, the kind of responses that we've been getting is something that is, of course, making news and headlines these days. But, of course, what our angle has been with regards to this budget as well, and especially in terms of the tough measures with regards to taxes and reforms that have been part of the budget, is keeping in view the IMF and its conditions, and, of course, our hopes of getting that extended fund facility. And so I want to understand your take on, first of all, whether you truly think that this budget has actually met the varying conditions of the IMF and has satisfied the IMF to the extent that we will be able to meet the kind of bailout package that we're actually looking for, given the fact that the SPA also was something that was welcome and taken on by a positive note from the IMF. So we want to then understand whether or not this budget is actually welcomed by the IMF, because different reports are coming in with regards to certain conditions not being met, or the IMF still having some concerns. And what other measures do you think will be majorly a cause of contention and a point where Pakistan would have to negotiate, keeping in mind the already raised burden on the people?
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I think, nothing is certain until, the board of IMF approves the deal. But just looking at all the different statements that have been coming from the IMF itself, from the Pakistani government, independent observers, things are broadly moving in the right direction. I think the budget hasn't really been kind on the poor people in Pakistan, the masses, with all the increases in taxes, but it has done enough to balance the government's books and keep the primary deficit and the overall fiscal deficit at a level where the IMF would be comfortable with it. So, the government has announced a raft of, new tax measures. Unfortunately, a lot of them are, following on those people who are already overtaxed, or, indirect taxes which fall unevenly on, the poor more. But all that aside, there is this fact that the primary deficit and fiscal deficit will remain contained. So now, the thing is that Pakistan still has a precarious current account balance and foreign reserves specifically. A lot of things have improved. The inflation has gone down from its peak of about 35%. Now, on an annual basis, it's still slightly over 20%. On a monthly basis, it's around 12%. The rupee has been quite stable for months and months. It even appreciated a bit. But then that stability is based on the fact that there are still a lot of restrictions on sending money outside. For example, profit repatriation. There's still restrictions on imports, and all that is keeping the growth rate low. And once those restrictions are relaxed in order to jack up the growth rate, then your reserves can go down quickly. So that's why it's important to have a deal with the IMF quickly. That will give you $6 to $8 billion over the next 2 or 3 years, and then it will also release money from the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, even some of the bilateral donors. So all in all, I wouldn't say that the underlying, the root causes of the of our economic problems have been solved, but at least a breathing space will be gained of about 1.5 to 2 years, in which the government can and should take more serious measures to remove a lot of the economic malaise, the state enterprises, the large scale subsidies and the circular debt in our energy sector, the misbalances between our expenditures and revenues, and the fact that our tax regime doesn't encourage export, it doesn't encourage industrial growth. So those are the things that now the government, it came in February, so you can give it, this much benefit of doubt that it didn't have enough time to, really take a lot of measures. But now it will have a run of a year, in which it would be crucial for the government to, utilize the breathing space and take, hard measures to set a long-term economic vision for the country.
Absolutely, and I understand that these hard measures are also in fact part of the budget, but we keep on hearing from the finance minister also in terms of the tough decisions the government has taken, and with regards to, of course, making sure that the economy is on the right track, and then of course the hopes with the IMF. But at the same time, it seems that there are also reports coming in of the people also reacting to the increase in taxes, also reacting to the lack of reforms that we haven't seen previously as well, and so understanding that maybe this time around would be different is also difficult for them. And then of course moving forward with the actual implementation of those reforms would be difficult given the kind of political scenario we're also in. So in terms of making sure that while we of course talk to the IMF and look for this extended fund facility, is there also that build up in terms of making sure that all the stakeholders and the people in Pakistan are also on board in terms of making sure that while we take tough measures, there is also the need for people and their burdens to be eased?
Well, yeah, so the IMF will look at two things, first of all, the economic side of things, and then the political side of things. The economic side I've already explained. There'll still be some negotiations on the details, I'm sure. But ultimately, I think there's a very high chance that we'll get a deal, and pretty soon, maybe, end of July, beginning of August, because we do need that money coming in very fast. But the other thing is, the political stability. That's what IMF will be watching. So, the first thing around that would be, the stability of, the majority in parliament, which doesn't seem under too much stress at the moment. There's all these issues related to how, the reserve seat case goes and so on. And then some of the cases that the PTI has filed for, in terms of rigging and so on. But still, at the moment, the government seems to have a comfortable majority. And then, the next thing it would look at is, politics on the street. And if there is, political instability, you might be following what's happening in Kenya at the moment. Kenya is, a country very similar to Pakistan in terms of political instability and elitism and corruption and so on. And there have been even attacks on the parliament and burning of the parliament. So far, obviously, those kind of things don't happen in Pakistan. But if street protests were to erupt in Pakistan on a scale of what is happening in Kenya, then obviously that could create doubts. But again, if you look at how things are, if people did not come out when the inflation was about 35%, now when the inflation is going down and there is some economic and political stability, so you can take a guess that even in terms of political stability, things will stay stable long enough to give the government a chance, both on the economic side and the political side, to now focus on taking more deep rooted reforms. This budget, as I said, is heavily skewed towards just balancing the books. It's not so much about giving relief to the people, about having tariff and taxes which increase your exports, which revitalize your industry. It's whatever the government could find. So now the government has to move on these other targets, giving relief to the people, increasing your exports, increasing your direct taxes, revitalizing industry, solving your state enterprise issues, resolving your energy sector. So that is, the tasks that are lying in front of the government now.
Absolutely, Dr. Saab. It is fortuitous that you have actually mentioned Kenya's example. I think that there's something very interesting that seems to have happened over past decade, and that is the mood shift at the IMF. I remember in 2014, if you remember, there were sit-ins in Pakistan. Pakistan was part of an IMF program. And at that time, given that there was so much pressure on the country or the government, at that time, the finance minister had approached IMF, and some certain terms were relaxed to support the government. But we have seen recently in Sri Lanka, where mob violence was there, and they actually overran the presidential palace, and the fund could have helped by offering some kind of olive branch, but that did not happen. Why do you think that is happening? And it seems to be happening everywhere, including Egypt, that seems to be teetering on the brink at this moment.
Well, it's happening because in those other countries, they happened at the time that the economic crisis was at its peak. Now, the thing is, in Pakistan, that stage has passed. The peak of the economic crisis was, say, about a year ago, when your inflation was so high, when, the rupee was in free fall. So remember, we had a 9-month IMF program, and that has brought in some stability. So in terms of, the peak of the economic crisis, I think the worst is past us. And now it's more about, taking more steps to reduce inflation by increasing direct taxes and so on. A lot also depends on how the global economy goes, especially the oil prices and so on. But if the dollars start flowing into Pakistan and the rupee stays stable or depreciates slowly, then there is some breathing space, elbow room for government to be able to absorb some of the increases that will come in terms of taxes and to some extent even inflation from the IMF program. But overall, I won't say that the situation today in Pakistan is as bad as it was in Sri Lanka when it had its peak of the crisis, when the last government fell and so on, and even Kenya. So in those ways, Pakistan is doing a little bit better.
Right. Dr. Niaz, there's also, of course, the issue of reforms that you earlier just mentioned. Unfortunately, it seems that this word has lost its meaning over time. We've used it in so many different ways and in so many different governments as well, but unfortunately, unsuccessfully. And so while we talk about the need for reforms, and it's great that there is a move or direction towards them, how are we so sure that we're going to be able to see them actually happen this time around?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, things are still pretty slow, but you do see one or two, signs. So maybe, PIA will this time go. It's supposed to go by August. And if it does go, then, that would, increase the trust and confidence about the seriousness of this government to, take some deep-seated measures that have been, delayed for decades and years and decades. So if it's able to do PIA, that will give some confidence to the markets and to the government, and that will set the stage for it to start taking, other measures, because, PIA is just one tip of the iceberg. There's so many other issues and so on. So it's important for, the pressure to, be sustained on the government from all sides, from the media, from, independent observers, from IMF and so on, so that, the reforms pick up space. And as you said, it's become, a very, meaningless word in Pakistan, unfortunately.
Globally, it has become a fearsome name. In UK, Reform Party is something that has appropriated this name for very terrifying purposes. So reform can be ugly.
Faisal, when we take a look at what is needed and of course what needs to be overcome to actually accomplish certain goals is also of course what we need in terms of political consensus. And while of course we talk about this many times as well, just as we talk about reforms, there is of course an understanding of how things are and how things might be in the future. And I want your perspective on whether or not, especially when we talk about the current state of affairs on the economy, our need to get the IMF bailout package, do you foresee any sort of opposition or hindrance that we might face with regards to political consensus on the matter, whether or not we'll have that cooperation across political parties, across provinces, to ensure that whatever it is that we do decide to take forward, we are actually able to implement? Because of course with the budget as well, we saw certain oppositions with regards to that, even though it has been passed now, but this is something of course that we'll need a lot more when it comes to implementation.
Yes, and obviously when we talk about consensus, political consensus, of course when I see towards KPK's government, of course it is the government of PTI, and then PTI itself, of course we know that in the parliament they have I mean the seats, very significant seats out there as well, and then they have support base on ground as well. And when I see all of these things, of course, I'm someone who really wants the dialogue to take place, and that dialogue should be successful in terms of political consensus and consensus on security of Pakistan and consensus on economy of Pakistan. Because once they all sit on table, all I expect from all of the stakeholders, including all of the political parties and rest of all of the stakeholders of the state, then what I want from them is to win the hearts of people at large of Pakistan, and that can only be through generating that consensus, so that we can of course put forward our economy, put forward our security and our political domain on a right track, where we might see hindrances in coming future, but we should be strong enough as a nation to, of course, counter them. So now I just want to highlight a past of Pakistan's, Pakistan's, of course, the problems which has been faced by Pakistan in terms of economy and security, and them too, of course, they have contributed in where we are standing right now. 20 years of war on terror. Pakistan has been relentlessly fighting war on terror, and Pakistan for 20 years, of course, it was a time when the investors, the FDIs, we couldn't attract, and the only reason behind it was that we were practically in a war against terrorism. And during that time, of course, our own domestic investors, they favored taking out all of the their industries and placing it somewhere in Bangladesh and Far East. And there are many of the examples, people actually moved out there. So in total, around $220 billion of our economy we lost, and of course the human cost was around 75,000, which Pakistan gave lives to in this war on terror, and still doing. And our security forces, our intelligence services, they are day and night fighting against the same menace, the same terrorism, to ensure security of the state itself, of Pakistan, and people at large of Pakistan. Now we are standing somewhere where all of these problems, they were brewing for nearly more than 20 years, and after 20 years of them problems, and then in the middle we had COVID as well, and we had political instability in the country as well for nearly 2 years. I mean, since 2 years that political instability is still on. All of these problems, they actually contributed in our economy wherever it is standing now. Now is the time for all of the stakeholders to sit down and bring forward a consensus for the sake of people of Pakistan.
No, but I know what should be done. I'm saying whether or not it will be possible.
It can be possible. It can be possible if everyone can be fair. I'm not, just mentioning about the government quarters.
Can everyone be fair?
I'm not just talking about the government quarters. I'm not talking about the rest of the powerful institutions.
If that happens, you have reinvented human nature.
Powerful institutions as well, and at the same time, people who are in the opposition, be they outside of the jail or inside of the jail, all of them, they should be included, and the dialogue should be with the open hearts for the sake of people of Pakistan, for the sake of Pakistan itself, so that we can move on, we can move forward.
And the onus is on?
Onus is on everybody. Onus is on all of the stakeholders, because
have you heard about diffusion of responsibility?
I have. But of course, when it comes to onus, then that onus can be put on all of the stakeholders, because be they political or non-political stakeholders, all of them, they are important to this country. We shouldn't be forgetting, if I mention here the security institutions of Pakistan, they are more than pivotal in the current circumstances. Reason being, right now we are actively in a war against terrorism, still in a war against terrorism. Right. And I think, Azme-Istakam, the new chapter of Pakistan's war on terror, Pakistan's war on against all of the instabilities, I think it is important, and all of the stakeholders, they have to, of course, contribute.
Right, absolutely. And we'll be talking more about that as well in the next segment too. But I want to shift the focus back on the economy as well. And Farrukh, with reference to what we've just discussed with Faisal, I want your take on that as well in terms of political consensus. But add to that, how much of that will also factor in our negotiations with the IMF, whatever political scenario currently is. We've had the SBA, which happened under the caretaker government as well, and successfully so. And so I want to understand how much of this will impact now. And also in terms of the team currently that is actually leading this discussion, and the way that of course they're also dealing with political pressure, with the pressure from the people, and of course in order to bring the economy on the right track. How prepared do you think they are in terms of their plans, in terms of their strategies and the course of action that they're going to take?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. First of all, regarding national consensus, and you asked Faisal about onus. I think that if you break the spellings down of that word, the solution is there on us, right? So, so if we cannot actually show leadership, I think nobody else is going to. And my dear Fatan actually, by turning nebulous, actually decided that he is not going to show leadership in that context. Otherwise, he would have shown, given you certain names on whom the onus should be. Now, I don't know whether we are going to ever have consensus, because as I pointed out, if you get everybody working in tandem and you know, allowing the best natures to dominate them, then you have reinvented human nature. That is now how things work. Regarding economy, I think Pakistan has bent over backwards to please IMF, and even after that, if IMF is not ready, I hope it is, but if it is not ready, it speaks more about the nature of IMF. And this is the question that I put to Dr. Saab as well. I think that something incredible seems to happen with the IMF and with the entire Bretton Woods systems that celebrated its 80 years this year, right? Recently, a few days ago, they celebrated 80 years of their 80th anniversary. Now, why do I say this? Because in the past, when this neoliberal economic order was conceived, the whole purpose was that the economy should be allowed to function, that there shouldn't be that many distractions or distortions in the system, so that middle class actually is buoyed and created. But now somehow the kind of nature that the IMF seems to have adopted is wear iron boots and crush the middle class. Remember that India's disastrous demonetization, its concept actually came from World Bank, not from India, right? And it practically destroyed the middle class, especially MSME sector, micro, small, medium enterprises sector. Similarly, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, elsewhere, it seems to be asking for the impossible. For example, they could have asked the government to go for very quickly cutting the fat, right? Freezing the PSDP. If you can't do that, you could have at least, you know, asked for SOEs and immediate divestment of that. There, they accept the explanations of the government, right? But when it comes to taxing and overburdening the working class, they actually very happily push the government towards that. What does it mean? They are actually practically trying to remove the middle class, not only in our country, every country in the world. And well, this is where I ask you, why is it that this is happening? Because it is essentially quite opposite to Keynesian model, so many other models, even a neoliberal model. Because it seems that the new billionaires seem to have gamed the system. For example, I keep on mentioning Geeta Gopinath and how she was, you know, installed as the chief economist of the IMF. And after that, what happened? You know, Sri Lanka had a problem with Adani contract. And all of a sudden, the economy goes to, you know, to the dogs. And after that, the new government actually concedes ground and accepts Adani Group's conditions, and that's how they function. Similarly, Bangladesh, to preempt that possibility, goes out of the way and requests IMF to bail them out, help them out, and then regarding what? Adani Group. Adani Group is not only actually distributing power all over the world, but it is also collecting seaports and airports. So right now, one of the things that we are going to divest immediately is airports, right? So there seems to be this some strange kind of change of character in IMF that seems to have lost its actual, first it lost its heart, now it seems to have lost its mind.
So does that mean that we should change our strategy with the IMF, or do we have any alternative? Can we afford not to go to the IMF?
If you can argue with somebody rational, right? is somebody is not being reasonable and they don't have any kind of patience for your people, what do? Right? You actually submit, and this is essentially what we have done. Now I think that there is no room, further room to follow further medications that are given by IMF, because after that people will start dying in big numbers. So
but
I think
essentially medication is supposed to help. So
yeah, poison is also medicine, and it actually helps people when they are actually in pain, because it can euthanize them. So there is some kind of solution of that sort, if you want to call it a solution. Pakistan had conformed to all the demands, and that's all. And I seriously hope that it actually bails Pakistan out and there is some kind of concession. But again, the system is gamed. When this system, and it is not only restricted to economics, it is also affecting international politics. For example, all this pressure on the president, the US president, to actually step aside and not actually run again, it started from withdrawal of Afghanistan. You can call him senile, you can do whatever you want, but there are people who are actually after him because of all this. And if they can't actually see it, then there is an alternative system, at least for people like me who actually firmly believe in the efficacy of Western democracy. Russian system, then I will change. I believe that my imagination is holding the world together. What are you going to do about it, right? So all I have to do is shut my allegiance and go to the other system and see the magic done.
Right,
Sana,
absolutely.
Sana just wanted to include something. When it comes to talking to IMF, and IMF coming up with strange kind of demands from Pakistan, I think one advocacy that we must keep on doing, that is related to our quest against the terrorism, and that quest is not only for Pakistan, the security of Pakistan. In a way, ultimately we are trying to secure the whole world, because we shouldn't be forgetting that ISIS Khorasan, that is always considered as a backyard of the terrorism, we are countering that too, and that point should always be highlighted.
Absolutely, and we will have time.
When a country is, of course, having that kind of stance in favor of the whole world, then IMF should be considering that as well.
Absolutely, and Faisal will have ample time to talk about that in our next segment.
But I like the phrase quest for terrorism. I think there can be a book
like
after.
To quickly go to Dr. Niaz Murtaza as well. Thank you for your patience, Dr. Niaz. With reference to what we've been discussing with the IMF and its role, I want your comment on that as well. But add to that also what Faisal earlier mentioned in terms of the stakeholders involved, and of course our security institutions. They're of course also playing a larger role in terms of SIFC and supporting the government in terms of getting more FDI in, and so that's going to be an important aspect of this fiscal year as well. What sort of efforts do you think SIFC can also play with regards to the kind of reforms that we're looking for, the kind of change that we're hoping for, and what exactly will their contribution be in the next year?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hype around SIFC, but it's still yet to deliver on that hype. We haven't had really big investment coming through it. And maybe it's everybody's waiting for the IMF deal to go through, but once the IMF deal goes through, obviously it will not be enough. We'll need the World Bank loans, the ADP, but then on top of that we also need large scale investment from friendly countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE. So hopefully SIFC can also become a bit more active and start delivering on many of the MOUs that have been signed, and the statements that have been issued, so many billions from this country, so many billions from that country. So hopefully those will also materialize, and we'll see tangible investment that creates long-term employment opportunities in Pakistan, revitalizes industry, and most importantly also creates enough exports to pay for the foreign investment profit repatriation that will happen over the years. So all those things are still waiting to happen, And I think once July is over and we have a deal, then it will be the government's chance to show that it can really deliver on all those strong commitments and policy statements that it has made.
Absolutely. And Dr. Niaz, while we have you with us, I also want your take on our next segment. We're taking a look at the, of course, surge in terrorism and, of course, the Azm-e-Istikam that has recently been launched. And, of course, in light of what has recently happened in terms of the tragic death of the ex-senator and, of course, 3 others that were killed in an IED blast in Bajor. This is just one other incident, unfortunately, in which these policymakers and decision makers, along with our security officials and others, have been targeted. And we've seen the people face this issue of terrorism and the spike in terrorist activities for quite some time now, particularly in KP and Balochistan. Azm-e-Istikam has been launched, and in a sense it talks about emphasizing on the already existing system of our intelligence-based operations and moving forward with a renewed resolve and zero tolerance, and of course making sure that we are bringing in the kind of change that is needed. But what exactly do you think are the measures that are going to make it successful, and whether or not this has the kind of substance that is needed and will also take into cognizance what perhaps was needed in terms of implementation as part of the National Action Plan as well?
Well, and so that's another issue which is related to the economy. We were talking about political instability affecting economic performance, but then terrorism is another thing. And it's becoming more and worse and worse, with the frequency increasing. Obviously, it's not at the same level when it was from 2017 to 2014, when it caused tens of billions of dollars of losses. But it could move towards that. So it's important to have some kind of operation around that. Now, obviously, the situation right now is not the same as 2007, when TTP had conquered vast tracts of land in Swat, in ex-Fata, especially Waziristan and so on, and that necessitated a large-scale operation, military operation, which led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, causing a lot of misery to them. And so obviously there is a fear of that kind of an operation happening again. But the situation today is very different. TTP doesn't hold large tracts of land. It has pockets. So we don't need a large-scale military operation of the type that we had from 2009 to 2014. We need more intelligence operations backed by special commando action based on what the intelligence operation find, and mop up those pockets in a way where it doesn't cause too much misery for the ordinary people, no displacement, no harsh checking at all those checkpoints and all, so that all this opposition that we are hearing, especially from parties and KP, can be placated. So again we need a very clear vision of what is going to be involved in Azm-e-Istikam. And I think the government has started clarifying that it's not going to be a large-scale military operation, and I think that's the way it should be: intelligence operations backed by quick commando operations to minimize the misery of people.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Niaz Murtaza, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. And Faisal, I'd like to take this discussion forward in terms of what Azm-e-Istikam will all be about. And while, of course, the government and the army has clarified that this is not a large-scale military operation, and as Dr. Niaz was mentioning, there isn't need of that operation as well. And so the fears and concerns that have been raised are perhaps misplaced. But in terms of what it actually does bring to the table is also perhaps still not clear. What exactly is Azm-e-Istikam going to be involving that is not already happening? While I understand it's the scaling up of the already existing structures and intelligence-based operations, but what is going to be part of this resolve that perhaps has been missing?
Yes, Sana, it's a very good question, and especially when you highlighted that, of course, all of these IBOs, they were taking place in past, and of course they are continuously taking place every day. And why Azm-e-Istikam? To me, Sana, when we talk about CPAC is being considered as it's going to be backbone of Pakistan's economy in coming years, in coming decades, and that is why the stability of CPAC it is much needed one. And when we talk about attacks on Chinese, attacks on CPEC related places in recent past, they have increased, and they are originating from within Afghanistan. Very recently the incidents took place, all of them, when we follow the tracks, they go back to 3 provinces. We keep on highlighting Nuristan, Nangarhar and Kunnad, and all of these provinces, of course, Taliban do accept that IMU is there, ETIM is there, and then TTP is there, BLA is there, and then ISIS Khorasan, it has presence out there as well, and few of the other sort of banned outfits that are there for Iran as well. I mean, Jandullah is there as well. So all of these, when we talk about all of these terrorists, of course they are out there as an industry, and anyone, I mean, we very recently we've given dossiers as well to the world powers, and that are related to how India is financing these terrorists, and to do what? The only reason behind it is that India is facing 2 front. India knows that China is on the border as well at eastern Ladakh, and China has stationed their troops there, and China has moved their fighter jets there for only one reason, that they are actively head on with India. So that is one front for them, and then the other front is obviously with Pakistan. That has always been there since the conflict of Kashmir started. We had wars with them. So these 2 front actually India is concerned about, and India has been trying to engage Pakistan in a way that it is being countered from its western border, of course from Afghanistan. They have been funneling money, and they have been investing in that. So their facilitations and their financing is actually to of course deter Chinese, to of course pack up everything and go back, and they are at their best trying their level best to of course affect Pakistan and China's relations. And when it comes to Pakistan and China's relations, then of course is CPEC, and if they are targeting CPEC from Gwadar to the border with the China, what they're trying to do is they are actually trying to sabotage the friendship between both of the countries. That friendship, the very friendship, is actually behind the idea and the concept of CPEC, and CPEC being pivotal for Pakistan's future, pivotal for Pakistan's economic future, I must say. That is why we are terming it into Azm-e-Istihkam.
Right.
And it is being mistaken by the political parties, certain political figures in Pakistan. They need to know that it has everything to do with Pakistan's stability and Pakistan's economic stability,
right,
as the premier. And in coming days, Sana, I just want to mention it here, that of course certain tech transfer would take place in terms of further strengthening security when it comes to CPEC and Chinese working in Pakistan. So there will be extra efforts in Pakistan,
right, absolutely,
made
and
to of course ensure
these are
that they
welcome
are secure.
given the of course phase 2 of CPEC. But while we of course talk about what sort of measures and concerns are there within the borders of Pakistan, Farrukh, of course, as Faisal also mentioned, there's a lot of concerns in terms of foreign elements also involved coming in, of course, from within India. Then of course there's the issue of Afghanistan. We also have Iran, and so I want to understand, while we talk about Azm-e-Istihkam and its implementation, or the kind of strategies we'll need to increase that and to have that resolve of different provinces and political parties, there's the need of also bringing in measures with regards to countering these foreign elements as well. And we've seen a lot of efforts that the government has already taken in this regard, how we've highlighted this fact on international platforms, but that hasn't had the result that one would hope for. So what exactly will Azm-e-Istihkam do with regards to foreign elements coming in from India, for example, or the assurances we need from Afghan Taliban?
Right. Sana, Faisal is a geopolitical analyst, right? So essentially it goes immediately to a meta theory of regional politics. My concern is that whatever is happening within Pakistan's confines. So we have to first of all look at what is going on here, right? When there is a tangled thread, and if you want to untangle it, what do? You pick one end of the thread and then start opening the knots, right? The first knot, because we are talking about this terrorism incident that took place today and cost us a senator and 3 potential lives. What what nature was there of this attack? It was an IED blast, right? It wasn't a suicide blast. It wasn't ambush. It wasn't anything else. IED. Now, where exactly are IEDs being made? This is a big question.
Yeah.
Why is it that we haven't reached those places and smoked them out? Reminds me of a tour I took in 2011 to the Kurram agency. They had actually cleared the Tel Pada Chanar road, a Kurram road, and we actually traveled. And we went to Sadda, where Hakimullah Masood actually used to have his base. And the amazing thing was, there was, you know, when it comes to electricity supply and everything was present at the cave. So it means essentially the local bureaucracy of Warda was also working with them, right? Or at least pressured by them. And then we went inside and there were landmines at the top of the cave itself, and they asked us not to push it because then it can explode. My humble submission is, start with basics. And when you talk about all this international politics, remember Pakistan is a country. Countries or nation states are supposed to have strong borders. If you are taking care of your border, and then you are actually taking out all the elements. Do you want to conclude?
No, carry on.
I thought that you...
I was listening to your point.
Yeah. So the point is that I don't know why do we need to actually explain repeatedly that Azme Istehkam is this and not that. With due respect, I would love to call it an operation, right? Operations Azme Istehkam. If you don't like it, sue me, right? But the humble summation is that with this, you have IBOs that are continuing. But then you have to look at 4 or 5 major things. Money trail. And I'm not saying that, okay, these theories that money would be coming from this place or this country is financing. Get to the people who are actually handling these guys and check their accounts. What kind of hundi or hawala is actually supplying that money? Close that loophole.
Right.
And finally, of course, when it comes to all this sociology of terrorism in the country, you'll have to actually go with the software and hardware. Today, there was a mainstream program, and I usually love that program, but they gave 5 minutes to this assassination or death of senator. And then after paying lip service immediately, Imran Khan and this and that and whatnot. This is the problem with software of our media.
Right.
It has been created with an angle. So if it is not going to do its job, then it will be, like India's media, it will be made irrelevant. Let us do that. Let us create other avenues where you can have a voice and you can change perceptions and the state can impact. So let's call all of this Operation Azme Istehkam. That's it.
Right. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. And of course, this fight continues, and we hope that we're able to achieve the success that we've done so previously as well. Our resolve is there, and Azme Istehkam is just another part of that resolve, and we hope that we can wipe out this menace once for all. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.